American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel.
Welcome to Eyes on Israel. I'm Rabbi Pesach Wilicki. Last weekend, the Islamic Republic of Iran attacked Israel. In what was the largest ever missile attack in the region, Iran launched 170 attack drones, more than 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles at Israel. According to the Israel Defense Forces, none of the drones or cruise missiles even made it into Israeli territory. And of the 120 ballistic missiles, only 5 made it through the defenses of Israel and of other nations, including Saudi Arabia and Jordan. According to the IDF spokesman, General Daniel Hagari, only a single 10-year-old girl was injured in the attacks. The attack was the terrorist regime in Iran's way of retaliating for an Israeli airstrike on the Iranian consulate in the Syrian capital of Damascus, carried out on April 1st. That airstrike by Israel destroyed the consulate building, killing at least 7 officials, including Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a top commander in Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards, and senior commander Mohammad Hadi Haji Rahimi. Zahedi, a former commander of the IRGC's ground forces, Air Force, and the deputy commander of its operations, was the most high-profile Iranian target killed since President Donald Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad in 2020. 2 days later, on April 3rd, the Coalition Council of Islamic Revolution Forces, affiliated with the more conservative ideological faction in Iran, published a notice of mourning and appreciation for Zahedi. The notice praised Zahedi for, quote, the strategic role in consolidating and strengthening the resistance front and in the planning and execution of the Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa flood is how Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran refer to the mass murder, rape, and other atrocities committed on October 7th. In the wake of the Iranian attack on Israel of last weekend, President Joe Biden reportedly told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the U.S. would neither participate in nor support any offensive action against Iran in response. Now, I believe that I speak for all Israelis when I say that nobody on our side wants the U.S. to participate in any offensive action on our behalf. Israel has never and will never ask that anyone fight any war for us. But support? Why would the U.S. not support any offensive action by Israel? Israel may or may not decide to take such action. That's a calculation that Israel must make based on a range of factors, some of which we'll hear about from our expert guest in a few moments. But should Israel decide to attack Iran, should Israel decide that the time is right to deal with the Iranian threat, why would the U.S. not support it? Let's remember that Iran refers to Israel as the little Satan and the United States as the great Satan. Iran calls for death to America as much as it calls for the destruction of Israel. So why would the U.S. be opposed to Israel striking a tyrannical terrorist regime that is the sworn enemy of the United States and has just launched a mass kinetic attack on Israel? And a few days after the attack from Iran, it was reported that Iran had informed the U.S. in advance that it would be attacking Israel, and that the U.S. responded that any attack on Israel should remain, quote, within certain limits. I wonder if the 300 projectiles fired in Israel are within those limits. And what we're seeing here is that the U.S. apparently gave a green light to Iran to retaliate against Israel's assassination of one of the architects of October 7th. What exactly is going on here? To help us make sense of what happened, what it means, and what we might be seeing going forward, we turn to our good friend, Mideast military and geopolitical expert, Reserve Major Elliot Chodov. Elliot, welcome back to Eyes on Israel.
Thanks, Pesach. Good to be back.
So, Elliot, about 2 months ago, President Donald Trump was on Maria Bartiromo's show on Fox News, and she told an interesting story He told an interesting story. President Trump said that after the assassination of Soleimani, the Iranians actually informed the Americans that they'd be retaliating, but that it wouldn't be too serious and not to overreact to it, that they wanted to retaliate to save face, but they didn't want a regional war. And now this time we're hearing reports through Turkey and elsewhere that there was also a similar communication that Iran was going to attack. Although I struggle to see how this attack by Iran was not designed to inflame tensions. After all, it was a huge attack. So how do you interpret what we're seeing here? Did Iran actually want to go to war with Israel? And if not, why the scale of the attack?
So first of all, let's start with a little bit of background and if you will, a slight correction. It's not the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Thank you.
Its purpose is to spread the Islamic revolution worldwide. Iran and Israel have been at war since 1979. What happened this past Saturday night was a qualitative escalation of that war, but not the outbreak of that war. That's been going on for decades, and it's been open warfare between Israel and Iran for quite a number of years, just not between Iranian territory and Israel. Because we've been dealing with Iranian threats and Iranian attacks, first of all, worldwide through what I call the shadow and proxy wars, but also directly, taking out the IRGC leadership in Damascus was a direct attack on Iran. Let's be clear on that. Not Iranian territory per se, but Iranian targets. So this has been going on for a very long time. What happened in the aftermath was, I hate to say this, but rather typical of American meddling and muddling in the Middle East. Historically, America, first of all, has never supported an Israeli offensive strike of any type whatsoever, going back to the day that Israel came into existence. It opposed the strike of the Six-Day War. It effectively opposed a preemptive strike in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. I can give you, it's a very, very long list because it's comprehensive. Now, Israel's done what it's done over the years, sometimes giving into American pressure as it did in 1973, catastrophically, and at other times not. The attack on the Iraqi reactor, Osirak, for example, and others. And to me, the question is always, when America says we won't support it, the key words are whether it says don't do it or else. The or else here becomes very, very critical. So I'm not terribly concerned about that, but let's go back. Israel takes out these Iranian generals, and at that point, the Biden administration makes a strategic error. And it immediately informs Iran, we didn't do it, we had nothing to do with it, don't hit us, which whether was intended to mean or not, you may hit Israel and we won't intervene. That's what's understood in Tehran. Okay, so I don't know what the intention was, but I know what the consequences were. And at that point, the Iranians ramp up their rhetoric, and we're gonna respond, and we're gonna respond, and we're gonna respond. And America comes to realize quickly on, within a couple of days, that they've made a mistake. They've basically given Iran the green light to do what it's been planning to do ever since Khomeini came to power, and that is to hit Israel with some sort of a mortal strike. At that point, America shifts gears and says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And that's when the coalition basically forms. And in the shadows of that is a message to Iran, you know what, if you do something symbolic, we won't make a big issue about it, but make sure it's just symbolic. Iran, by this point, is on its own treadmill. In other words, it's now running at a different speed, and it launches the attack that you described. By the way, don't forget the 100 rockets fired by Hezbollah into the Golan that night. Add that to the 300-plus weapons that were fired out of Iran. And with that, the grand coalition, if you will, and here with all due disrespect to the statement that President Biden said the other day, it wasn't America and its allies that stopped the attack. It was Israel and its allies that stopped the attack. It was a coalition that combined good intelligence, even superb intelligence, superb coordination, You know what? A multinational coalition operating at that level of coalition is very, very impressive. Credit where credit is due. American, whether it's cajoling or pressure on Saudi Arabia and Jordan to be full participants, at least in terms of full cooperation. And of course, Britain and France and their contributions, and the Israeli defense system, whether it was the ground-based missiles or the Air Force, aircraft went out over Jordan and went out east. And the first wave of drones was taken out way, way, way to the east of us.
If you could talk about what you think Israel should do, because it's not so clear that escalating things is in the best interest of Israel right now. At the same time, we need to have deterrence.
Okay, so first of all, we don't have deterrence. Deterrence failed totally on Saturday night. The attack shows that we have no deterrence. Iran took the possibility of an Israeli response into account and ignored it. So forget deterrence. Deterrence is off the table as far as I'm concerned, which is why I'm going to say something you're going to find a little strange. I'll have to explain it really quickly. I don't believe that we should retaliate, because retaliation is in a deterrence frame. We're at war. In war, you don't retaliate. At war, you strike. You strike at strategic targets. You think strategically. There's word this morning that America has agreed to support a Rafiah operation if we don't have a massive retaliation against Iran. I think it's a good trade. In other words, thinking strategically means dealing with all the threats around you, with all of your coalition alliances, and coming up with the least bad, because there's no best here, right? The least bad option that you can get. And here, keeping this coalition together, finishing off Hamas and Rafiah, in my opinion, is more important than some sort of symbolic slap.
Elliot Chodoff, I wish we had more time for this. We're going to have you back on very soon. There's so much to talk about in this. Right. Thank you so much for joining Eyes on Israel. God bless. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel in just a moment. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. I know that we have to deal with the Iranian threat. Obviously, Iran is marching towards a nuclear weapon, and Israel has always known that it would have to eventually deal with this threat. And you might think that, hey, no time like the time, there's no time like the present. They just launched 300 projectiles at us. We might as well go after Iran. But as you were saying, Elliot, you have to have a plan, and this might not be the best time. Could you elaborate on that?
First of all, retaliation is part of a deterrence kind of a strategy. And first of all, let's be clear, retaliation is what happens when deterrence fails. If deterrence works, you don't have to retaliate. On the night of the attack, Israeli deterrence failed totally. In other words, zero deterrence. The Iranians fired their 300 missiles of various types. Hezbollah fired 100 rockets into the Golan simultaneously. The Iranians took a potential Israeli response into account and then simply ignored it and fired anyway. So deterrence value at that point for Israel is zero. That's number one. We've moved now qualitatively into the stage of actual warfare between Israel and Iran, past, again, what I call the shadow proxy stage. Now we're in open warfare. Retaliation is an inappropriate response or an inappropriate strategy for warfare. You know, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, America didn't say, well, they sank 4 battleships and destroyed 200 planes. We're going to sink 6 battleships and destroy 250 planes. We're at war. War means a whole different thing. It means taking a global perspective. As a matter of fact, Japan got America into the war, but the American strategy was Europe first. Why? Because you have to think globally. Same thing here. Israel's fighting Hamas. It's fighting Hezbollah. It's fighting the Houthis. It's fighting the militias in Iraq and Syria. And of course, Iran behind that, coordinating it. But it has to deal with all of those simultaneously. That's on one side. On the other side, you've got a coalition that's now been cobbled together, which is a great thing for Israel. And you have to pay a price for a coalition. Once again, as the Americans and Brits learned in their coalition with the Russians in World War II. You don't necessarily have to love everybody in it, but you've got to deal with it if you want to hold it together.
Hold on, let's just clarify for our audience what you mean by a coalition here. Are you referring to the Saudis and the Jordanians who helped Israel with their defenses, or are you referring to something broader than that?
And the Americans and the Brits and the French. In other words, anybody who's standing now nominally with Israel as part of a coalition that didn't really exist 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And it's fragile, as coalitions tend to be. If Israel's considerations have to be all of those simultaneously. Now, there was word this morning that America has tacitly agreed on an Israeli operation in Rafiah in return for not a massive response against Iran. In my opinion, fair trade, good trade for Israel. We're talking now not about feel good. We're talking about how do you use your assets, your capital, and I'm talking about political capital, in the best way possible. Getting rid of Hamas is the number one immediate priority. Deal with that, see what's going to happen, further on down the road. One final point apropos retaliation and why it's a problematic strategy under the best of circumstances, and that is that it gives the initiative to the other side. In other words, retaliation is always something that you do after somebody else does something to you. They're calling the shots, they're setting the timing, they're setting the scale, and you're simply responding to them. In my opinion, it's a bad strategy overall, but in this particular case, it's totally inappropriate.
When we keep in mind the fact that Hamas is a proxy of Iran, it's funded by Iran. The Houthis are essentially an extension of Iran. They're a closer proxy, and Hezbollah, as you always point out, is actually, we shouldn't call Hezbollah a proxy of Iran. Right. Hezbollah is a branch of Iran. It's actually it's just like a chapter of Iran. They are Iran. So if we're already fighting Iran on multiple fronts, we're fighting them in Gaza, we're fighting them on the northern border when we fight Hezbollah. So it's not like, Iran needs to get their comeuppance for firing a lot of missiles at us last week. We're already fighting with them, and which fronts we choose to fight on has to do with our strategic goals,
exactly.
Not giving them a slap because they did this. But I have a question here that underlies this whole thing. You've been watching Iran more closely than most people. You're really and you're still getting, our audience is still getting to know you. I've known you for many years. You are one of the leading Iran watchers in the country. You've written on this. You've lectured on this extensively. As someone who's been watching Iran for so long, what do you think they were trying to accomplish? Again, going back to what I said when I teed you up in the previous segment, this was not a symbolic volley of attacks. It wasn't like what they did in the wake of the Soleimani killing, where they launched a few things at some empty buildings at an American base, not really intending to do any harm. As I mentioned, the story that Donald Trump told Maria Bartiromo. This was more than a symbolic attack, which means that Iran... What do you think, again, as a professional Iran watcher, what do you think Iran was trying to accomplish?
I think it was trying to accomplish two things, one domestic and one strategic, and the two are interrelated. The domestic one is, as I mentioned earlier, once they got on that treadmill after those first few days of the Biden, please don't hit us, and parenthetically, although they didn't say it explicitly, you can hit Israel. The Iranian leadership ramped up its rhetoric, and no country, no leadership wants to look weak. A dictatorship cannot look weak to its own population. So once it put itself in the position of we're going to show the Israelis, teach them a lesson, it couldn't back down. And by the way, in the 2 weeks prior, there were two separate internal Iranian attacks by ethnic groups against the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. Casualties were inflicted. In other words, there was a weakening there that the leadership needed to deal with. So that's on the domestic side. On the strategic side, I believe that the primary target of their strike was actually the airbase that was hit by two of the missiles, although there was no serious damage, at Nevatim, which is where the F-35 squadron is based. That's not a military secret. Everybody knows it. They wanted to take out that base, do as much damage as they could, maybe take out some planes in the process, which is why they sent extremely heavy missiles in that direction. They also were aiming at some targets in the north. There might have been a sort of sideshow toward Dimona, just on the Hail Mary sense of let's see if we can hit it, and possibly targets in the center of the country. Once again, since everything was taken out, it's kind of hard to tell what they were really aiming at, but perhaps Ben Gurion Airport. But to be able to get up in the morning and say, we eliminated an airbase, and possibly also Hatzerim airbase outside of Beersheba. We eliminated an airbase or two. We destroyed X number of planes. We took out an intelligence base in the north, et cetera, et cetera. We really inflicted heavy damage to Israel in response for its aggression, quote unquote, Iranian leadership. So it was a serious strategic attack. It wasn't simply symbolic. It wasn't the kind of attack that was launched against the American bases after Soleimani, where they said, okay, we hit the Americans, thank you very much, let's all go home and leave it alone. Had that attack succeeded, Israel would have been forced to launch a massive response against Iran. It wouldn't have been a response anymore. It would have been, now we're at war, we have to go after them.
The Iranians know that Israel is a nuclear power.
Correct.
Israel has, we never admit it publicly, Israel has nuclear weapons. So that means that the Iranians were willing to go down that road.
That's right.
At
which
this
is why
time.
I say deterrence failed. And I also believe that that's one of the reasons, certainly not the only reason, but one of the reasons for the American, British, and French coalition stepping in to try to prevent it. Because whenever they talk about we don't want to see escalation between Israel and Iran, in the back of their minds is always, if something goes wrong, Israel's fallback is nuclear.
Was Iran humiliated by the failure of this attack? And if so, what does this mean going forward? Meaning Israel will likely make a decision to either do nothing or to do something that just shows their strategic dominance. Meaning, I've heard rumors that Israel might just strike a specific target to send a message to the Iranians that they can strike wherever they want, or they might choose to do nothing for the reasons that you laid out. How do you see the Iranians proceeding going forward, where right now they kind of have their tail between their legs, and the rest of the Middle East is looking at them saying, "Oh, that didn't really work, did it?"
Right. So first of all, the Iranians are lying through their teeth to their own population. They're showing pictures of a forest fire and saying that it's Tel Aviv in flames. They're showing photos of a riot in South America and saying that it's the Israelis fleeing for their lives, and all sorts of nonsense like that. They have to. They have no choice. As I said earlier, a regime like that cannot get up and say, "Oops, we failed miserably. We're really impotent." That's the end of a dictatorship. Absolute end.
Right.
Once again, whether Israel acts or doesn't act, in my opinion, it should not be an in response. In other words, the Iranians know that we can hit whatever we want in Iran. We've already flown F-35s over Tehran, and we've told them about it afterwards. So the planes can get in, they can come out. What I believe is that we will continue doing what we've been doing, which is hitting Hezbollah and unfortunately getting hit back in the back. Or they've been doing the hitting, we've been responding. Interdicting Iranian moves in Syria as best we can, including strikes of the type that started this round against the generals in Damascus. But we've been hitting Iranian targets in Syria now for, 7-8 years at least. And I believe that's going to continue. That has nothing to do with the tit for tat. And this comes back to my point. This is the strategic thinking that's involved in winning a war. And we haven't gone, to full scale yet because, once again, you can't fight them all at once. One of the things that you talked about earlier, I'll finish with this, is not just Israel's strategic objectives, it's also its military limitations. In other words, Israel doesn't have the power to take on everybody all at once. We've got to slice it and dice it and prioritize.
All right, Major Elliot Chodoff, thank you once again for joining Eyes on Israel. We will certainly have you back many, many times. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel in just a few moments. Welcome back to Eyes on Israel. On November 29th, 2023, a few months ago, a violent mob of pro-Hamas demonstrators caused a riot in New York City. The context for the riot was the annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony at Rockefeller Plaza, the traditional kickoff of the Christmas shopping season in New York. Similar demonstrations took place in other cities, most notably in London, where jihad-supporting demonstrators disrupted Christmas shopping on Oxford Street and Piccadilly Circus in solidarity with Hamas. And in Italy, the traditional Christmas Eve performance at the La Scala Opera House in Milan was disrupted also by anti-Israel pro-Hamas protesters. The rioters at Rockefeller Plaza Christmas tree lighting were chanting, "Long live the Intifada," and "Christmas is canceled," which is a bit of a head scratcher to say the least. You see, while New York is the city in America with the highest concentration of Jews, I don't think too many of them participate in Christmas celebrations. I'm sorry to state the obvious, but Israel is not a Christian country. Jews do not celebrate Christmas. Christians make up only 2% of the population of Israel. So why do the enemies of Israel think it appropriate and on point to disrupt a Christmas celebration? The day after the Rockefeller Plaza Christmas tree riot, Steve Bannon, the most influential voice in the America First movement, played footage of the riot on his show War Room. After leading with footage of the violence, Bannon then said the following.
I keep telling people and reminding people this is not about Israel. This is not about the Jewish people. This is not about Jews. And everybody's trying to put that in there is missing what is going on. See what you see. This is a Sharia supremacist global movement powered by the Chinese Communist Party in the back that is funding the mullahs in Persia, in Tehran, in partnership with the criminal element of the KGB in Moscow with Erdogan, the individual who wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, his words, not mine, and the Gulf Emirates. And people better wake up on this. I'm talking about people on our side of the football. There's a lot of whining going on. You have to see what you see. See what's going on here. It's not that difficult. You have to do some work. Maybe you have to put away some prejudices. This is not about Israel. It's not about the Jewish people. That's part of it. But overall, that's actually a small part of it. This is about you. This is about your civilization. This is about your culture. This is about your society. This is about your country. And last night, about your traditions and your beliefs and your families and your children.
In recent episodes of this show, we've talked about the growing pro-Israel coalition we're seeing among nationalist Christian conservatives worldwide, from the Israeli flag-waving Bolsonaro supporters in Brazil to the Geert Wilders supporters in the Netherlands. Wilders displayed an Israeli flag in his campaign headquarters a few months ago. What Steve Bannon is pointing out is that what these conservatives elsewhere in the world understand, that Israel's war with Hamas is the front lines of a global battle for Judeo-Christian Western civilization, is somehow not getting through to a significant number of Christian, America First conservatives in the United States. Notable examples, for example, are Tucker Carlson, who has called for a ceasefire in Gaza, effectively calling for Hamas to not be removed from power, and Candace Owens, another influential conservative who has accused Israel of genocide. Let me say this plainly. Israel's fighting an enemy that seeks to destroy not only Israel and all Jews everywhere, but the West in general and the United States in particular. The failure of intelligent people who profess traditional Judeo-Christian values here in America is shameful and dangerous. One important and influential voice on the American right who does see things clearly is Mark Meckler. Mark Meckler is president and co-founder of the Convention of States. Mark Meckler, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Rabbi, thank you for having me.
So Mark, you heard my intro, and I find this issue very concerning, and we talked a little bit off the air about how we're going to deal with this question today. What is it that people on, to use Bannon's term, on our side of the football, what is it they're missing that their ideological compatriots worldwide are seeing clearly?
Well, I actually think there are two layers to this. I mean, first of all, I think some of them are just plain what I would call proto-isolationists. They have the fantasy that if America withdraws from the world, that everything will be fine, everything will be good here in the United States of America, will be unaffected by world events. And to put it simply, that's a fantasy. It's belied by all of modern history. The world is a very small place. What happens in Israel will happen here in the United States and around the world. And they just have to grow up and stop being children about world affairs. World affairs are complex, they're messy, they're dirty, and we're involved in them whether we like it or not. And if we try to withdraw, it will come to our shores. So I think that's the first level. And I think the second level is we are seeing Certainly for the first time and the most dramatically in my lifetime, I'm 62 years old. I'm a Jew and I grew up in Los Angeles. We're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism, actual straight up anti-Semitism that I've never seen in the United States of America. We're seeing it on the college campuses where we expect a bit of radicalism. But now, as you pointed out in Bannon's monologue, we're seeing it on the streets of New York and major cities all around the United States. So there are two layers to this, just the proto-isolationists and those that are actually fostering anti-Semitism.
So, people in the America First movement, and I think you really diagnosed the problem. I like to put it this way. They take the concept of America First and they think that they can turn it into America only, which really is just so short-sighted in terms of how the world works these days. But what's the message to these people? And do you think that any of it is really a kind of right-wing anti-Semitism that is under the surface of this ambivalence about what's going on in Israel?
I'm not sure I would call it right-wing anti-Semitism because I don't think it's actually a movement. I don't think it's coordinated in any way. And the vast majority of those who express it would recoil at the idea of being called anti-Semites. Candace Owens at the top of the list, Tucker Carlson, who I consider a friend, near the top of the list for the things he's saying. But when you say that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, I mean, first of all, to be very blunt, Rabbi, you're just unintelligent because it doesn't by any standards meet the meaning of genocide. The Palestinian population has grown dramatically since the start of Israel, literally, and it's continuing to grow today. Genocide means a wiping out of an entire genetic population. Israel could do this with total air superiority over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. They've chosen not to do it. Instead, they're going in on the ground, putting their soldiers at risk, hundreds of their soldiers now having been killed because of the choice to protect the civilian population. So using the term is either literally just stupid, just unintelligent, or it is a symptom of anti-Semitism. In other words, the Jews will be held to a different standard than anybody else in the world. It has been this way essentially since the beginning of time, and they are forwarding that trope.
I think that's a great point. That to call it anti-Semitism it's almost giving it too much credit for being a comprehensive ideology, and it's just really coming from shallow ignorance. But I think it's also America First people have a legitimate gripe against the United States pouring out billions of dollars in foreign aid. And because of the cynicism about what's going on in Ukraine, and I don't want to get into that topic, that's not my lane, but I certainly think a lot of the cynicism about it is justified. But they've thrown support for Israel into that same bucket. Now, I'm not a huge fan, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of America's support for Israel because it turns out we now realize that a lot of that support is used as leverage for the United States to have a say in Israel's national security decisions to Israel's detriment. And Israel would probably be better off, along with Caroline Glick and some others in Israel, actually advocate for a drawdown of that assistance. But I think that a lot of people in the America First movement don't understand that assistance to Israel is not the same as other foreign aid that goes to other nations.
No, what this actually is the point of the spear in the United States fight on the war against terror. And the war, I don't even like that term. I would say the war against radical jihadists, against people who would impose Sharia law worldwide. And Islam has always been this way. This has never changed. I mean, this is one of the astounding things about the historical growth of Christianity versus Islam. Christianity went through the reform. It became a non-militarized religious force for good instead of a force for evil, which sometimes it was under military expansion of Christianity, but it had a reform. That has not happened with Islam. Islam is now an ancient religion which has always spread by the tip of the sword, and they profess this. They intend to dominate us both religiously and theocratically. There is no difference in Islam between a system of governance and a system of religion. It is fundamentally incompatible with the way that the West is governed.
Yeah, so I think that what we're seeing then is that there are pockets on the right in the camp that you and I both identify with in America who kind of have their head in the sand and aren't recognizing that there is a civilizational battle going on. And that Israel is really just the front lines in the kinetic way of this battle. But this battle culturally is raging just as hot in America as anywhere. I'm fond of saying, I'm not fond of it, it's a sad thing, that the jihadists are taking over America without firing a shot.
Yeah, I think that's correct. They've taken over our institutions. Look, it's largely a function of money that's flowing through our institutions, money into corporations, money into government, money into our university systems. They have, because of the oil industry, almost an infinite flow of money comes out of the Qataris, the Saudis, and they are propagating this ideology of Islamic hatred all around the world. And it is deeply ensconced here in the United States, and especially so on our campuses. And I think sometimes we on the right ignore the campuses to our peril. We're like, they're a bunch of crazy kids doing crazy protests. Those kids, especially at the elite campuses, they are going to go on and run the largest organizations in the country, the largest corporations. They're going to be in positions of high government power, and that brings with it this incredible rabid anti-Semitism and the idea that the West is evil.
All right, Mark Meckler, just tell our listeners how they can follow you, how they can, I know you get a little hot on social media sometimes. Tell us how people can follow you, and thank you for being on Eyes on Israel.
Yeah, the best place they can get me is at Mark Meckler on Twitter or at conventionofstates.com.
All right, we'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel right after this. Welcome back. In a land where the echoes of prophecy blend with the whispers of the wind, Israel stands as a testament to miracles and challenges overcome. This is a place unlike any other, where the stories of the Bible unfold beneath your feet and the spirit of the patriarchs lingers in the air. Imagine walking the ancient roads once traveled by prophets, exploring the ruins of King David's citadel and experiencing the Bible not just as a sacred text, but as a living history that envelops you with every step. Israel's narrative is woven from more than just its past. It's a vibrant tapestry of courage and faith embodied by its people. Meet the modern-day guardians of this holy land, from the valiant soldiers who've left their homes to defend Israel, to the widows and orphans who've paid the ultimate price. This trip will be more than just a tour. It's an expedition of the soul, offering unique opportunities to volunteer, to celebrate, and to stand in solidarity with the people of Israel. Join us on an extraordinary 9-day voyage through Israel, where you'll not only walk in the footsteps of history, but you will stand on the front lines of faith and freedom. Witness the resilient response to adversity along the Gaza and Lebanese borders, and understand the true strength of the modern state of Israel. What could be more moving than celebrating Israel's Memorial Day and Independence Day in the Holy Land? You will stand shoulder to shoulder with Jews and Christians from across the globe in a powerful demonstration of unity and hope. Carefully crafted by Israel 365 and Jerusalem Tours, this biblically inspired, authentic journey promises to deepen your faith, broaden your understanding, and leave an indelible mark on your heart. The magic of Israel awaits to transform you. Visit tourtheland.com for more information and to register for this life-changing journey. Tomorrow evening, Monday after sundown, will mark the start of the Passover festival. Jews worldwide will gather around their tables for the Seder, to retell the story of the Exodus and to celebrate with a lengthy evening of rituals. In temple times, we would be gathering to eat the Passover offering, a lamb roasted over a fire, as described in the Bible. The Bible also commands certain other foods to be eaten along with the Passover offering. As we read in Exodus 12, they shall eat the meat on that night, roasted over the fire, along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Unleavened bread, bread made without yeast, is not only a requirement for the eating of the Passover offering that night. Many biblical verses point to unleavened bread as a central theme of the Exodus story. For example, just after the lengthy description of the Passover offering, unleavened bread takes center stage. Quote, "For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread. On the first day, eliminate yeast from your houses. For whoever eats leaven from the first day through the 7th shall be cut off from Israel." And then 2 verses later, "Observe the festival of unleavened bread. because it was on this very day that I brought your ranks out of Egypt. Observe this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month, you are to eat unleavened bread from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days, no yeast is to be found in your houses, and whoever eats leaven shall be cut off from the community of Israel, whether foreigner or native born. Eat no leaven. In all your dwellings you must eat unleavened bread. The slaughter and eating of the Passover was a one-day event. The prohibition against leaven and yeast lasts for 7 full days. And not only is the eating of any yeast product forbidden, it's a sin that is so severe that it's grounds for being cut off from the community of Israel. Why is refraining from leavened bread so important? And we should also note that the 7-day festival commemorating the Exodus, which we call Passover, is called in these verses and others the festival of unleavened bread. And it's not only referred to that way here in Exodus 12, but throughout the Bible in many other places. Now, it's certainly understandable that the Exodus from Egypt is cause for a week-long festival for rejoicing. But why is it named after unleavened bread, the festival of unleavened bread? Wouldn't it have made more sense to call this festival the festival of the Exodus, or some other name that expresses the historic importance of the emancipation from slavery in Egypt and the birth of Israel as a nation? What's so important about unleavened bread? And what does it have to do with the Exodus? Why was unleavened bread a requirement for the eating of the Passover offering? When describing the actual departure of Israel from Egypt, the Bible connects unleavened bread with one specific aspect of the Exodus itself. Quote, "And they baked the dough they brought out of Egypt into loaves of unleavened bread. It was unleavened because they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor could they prepare provisions for themselves." And then in Deuteronomy we read, "Do not eat the Passover with leaven. For 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in a hurry, so that you remember the time of your exodus from Egypt all the days of your life." According to these verses, the importance of unleavened bread is that it reminds us of the haste, the hurry with which the children of Israel left Egypt. They didn't have time to make leavened bread because they were rushing to leave. But there's a problem with this explanation. As we mentioned earlier, one of the requirements of the Passover offering was that it had to be eaten together with unleavened bread. The instructions for the Passover offering were told to Moses 2 weeks before the day of the Exodus. The Passover offering was slaughtered on the afternoon of the 14th of the month and was eaten that evening. The next morning, Israel left Egypt. If the reason for the importance of unleavened bread is that they rushed out of Egypt that morning without time for their dough to rise, why was unleavened bread a requirement for the Passover offering eaten the night before and prepared earlier? We can understand the answer to this when we consider another detail of the instructions for the Passover offering. Quote, "This is how you are to eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Passover of the Lord." God commanded Israel to eat the Passover offering with their coats tucked in, their sandals on their feet, their walking stick, their staff in their hand, and to eat it in a rush, in haste. Now imagine someone standing in their kitchen, eating quickly with their coat on, holding their car keys in their other hand. What you know is that this person is about to leave. They're on their way out the door. In other words, God wanted Israel to understand that their departure from Egypt began when they ate the Passover offering, even before they actually left. From the moment they ate the Passover, they were already gone. This is a powerful lesson for all people of faith. The Lord's Passover, God's choosing of each and every person who is devoted to Him, depends on the attitude that we have towards our journey with God. If we show God that we're in a rush, we're eager to follow Him, were already redeemed even before the journey has begun. It's fitting that this eagerness to follow God is represented by unleavened bread. The main difference between leavened and unleavened bread is that leavened bread is puffed up with air. It's literally made larger than its basic substance because of the hot air of the leavening process. In other words, unleavened bread is simple bread. It's not difficult to see why, in Jewish tradition, unleavened bread symbolizes humility and simplicity, while leavened bread symbolizes arrogance. By commanding Israel to eat only unleavened bread to commemorate the Exodus, God was teaching us a very important lesson. To be a part of God's people, to truly follow Him, we must come to the relationship with Him with the characteristics of unleavened bread, a combination of eagerness and humility. The 7-day festival commemorating the birth of Israel as a nation, God's chosen people, is named for the unleavened bread precisely because the characteristics of unleavened bread are the perfect description of the attitude that we all must have in a relationship of service to Him. It's interesting in light of this that the many grain offerings in the temple, which were cooked offerings made of flour, were also only to be unleavened. As we read in Leviticus chapter 2, every grain offering you bring to the Lord must be made unleavened, for any yeast or any honey must not be burned as an offering to the Lord. With our understanding of the symbolism of unleavened bread, this prohibition against offering leavened bread before the Lord in the temple makes perfect sense. Unleavened bread represents humility, simplicity, and eagerness to serve God. Passover recalls and commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. But that does not mean that we're merely celebrating freedom from slavery. The unleavened bread teaches us that the true purpose of emancipation from human bondage is not our own personal freedom to live as we please. The purpose of freedom is that only when we are free of human masters are we able to fully devote ourselves to eager and humble obedience to God. This is the message of the unleavened bread. This is the message of Passover. If you found this teaching insightful and inspirational, please purchase a copy of Verses for Zion, my most recent book of biblical teachings. 77 devotional style teachings where I take verses in the Bible, go into the original Hebrew, and pull out insights, inspirational insights from that verse. You can get the book Verses for Zion at getvfz.com. So go to getvfz.com, get your copy of Verses for Zion today. Thank you for watching Eyes on Israel, and have a happy and meaningful Passover.